Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. Let's rant with Scrapperlock. We're with our level 24 Stalker Psyop, who's getting close to level. Well, we got a ways to go for level 25, and I think we're on a story arc for Claire. Finally, Hand of Iron, and we're still doing this annoying street hunting. Can we complete this? Yes, let's get rid of it. Hate it. And let's see. List of names. We got to talk to Randall Jackson. So I think this is the part where Iron Hand is a traitor, right? He's like a cop who turned freak show. He went undercover, but he actually then got indoctrinated into the freak show. I think that's what's going on. All right, so today we've got something a little different. Um, there's a guy called on YouTube, used to be called the Questing Beast. Now he's called something else, like Friendly Beast or something. But if you Google Questing Beast, you should be able to find his channel. And he's got a brief 10-minute video where he talks about an article that came out in a New York paper. I don't know if it was the Times or what. I'm sorry, I don't remember the source. But apparently this article said that there was a huge shortage of dungeon masters, live for like in-person dungeon masters, I guess, in New York City. So he then did a poll where he asked people. He said, he feels that things are different in the quote unquote OSR, the old school revival or Renaissance community. Um, and he did his own. He said in that community, he feels like there isn't such a shortage of DMs, and so he did his own poll, like for among his, I guess, listeners or viewers. And in his poll, he asked people who played 5e and people who played in the OSR, and his poll showed that few people answered that half or more of their fellow players were DMs in 5e. I think it was about 5%, but almost 44% of people said it for the OSR. And so he was trying to talk about why, and he looked at what the article said the DMing job is. And he said, the article referred to DMing as thankless, taxing, and overwhelming, right? And he said, well, if that's the way you're selling DMing, and this is 5th edition, right, because it's modern D&D is what they're talking about, why would anyone want to do it? Why would you sign up to do a thankless, taxing, overwhelming job when you could just play and let somebody else do that job? So he said, well, no wonder there's a shortage of DMs if that's what they think they're signing up for. He then, the article then went on, and I'm pausing here because I'm reading my notes, to say that the DM needs to know all the rules, create the entire story, plan the logistics for the entire group, read scheduling and snacks, and cater the experience to what each individual player wants. And he said, again, who would sign up for that? The amount of effort it takes to do that is nearly impossible. And he summarized it by saying that what they're describing is that the DM is a combination all at once of a reference book, an epic storyteller, an event coordinator, and a life coach. And his words, this is going to feel out of reach for most people. And I agree. So it was sort of, if this is what you think DMing is going to be before you sign up to do it, who's going to sign up for that? I mean, I'm sure a few people would look at that and go, hey, cool. But I think the majority of people would be really intimidated by that and go, wow, that just seems like I can't do that. I can't even do one of those things, let alone all four at the same time, right? And so I think this is a really good point. And so what he argues is maybe the reason there's such a shortage of DMs is because people think that this is what they're signing up for, and they just don't think they can do it. And then nobody DMs, right? Because everybody thinks the same thing. I can't do that. So then he asked, why isn't this the same in the OSR? And he said, well, there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, most OSR games are quite a bit simpler than 5th edition, other than maybe AD&D. But most people who play in the OSR are playing more like basic expert D&D. And he showed the cover of the basic set. I used to have this cover, and it says for ages 10 and up. And I got the thing in 7th grade, and we played it, and we didn't have any trouble with it. But it was like a 40-page or 50-page rule book. It wasn't that beefy. It wasn't like the player's handbook, which is like 300 or something pages. And yeah, it only went up to levels 3, but yeah, you could learn how to play, and we had a Caves of Chaos module, and you got a lot of fun. And it was pretty basic and pretty simple, and we learned the rules. We taught them to ourselves, just me and my best friend, and we were able to play. No problem. I don't know if I'd be able to do that with the Modern Player's Handbook when I was 12. Probably not. Right? I mean, I was an intelligent kid, but oh my gosh, the Modern Player's Handbook is so full of exceptions and provisos and quid pro quos and contradictory or self-conflicting rules. I don't know how I don't know how a kid would learn it. That's for sure. So he said, well, if you got to know the rules, well, it's a lot easier to know the rules in OSR than it is in 5th edition. So that's one bonus to the OSR. The second thing is, traditionally in OSR games, in the old school D&D games, you have location-based adventures, right? The West Marches type game. You don't create stories like that. You make locations, and the party just goes and explores, and little plot hooks or whatever, but then the party just goes and explores the location. And the story, remember the emergent story video, the story emerges out of the party's interaction with the site that you created, or the encounters you created, not a predetermined Lord of the Rings style storyline, right? And so that's a lot easier to maintain because you're just working on sites, and they can only go to one place at a time. So you work on 1 or 2 locations, and while they're in location number 1, you work on location number 3. And it's a lot easier to maintain, and you don't have like interwoven stories. Remember James Hike, right? 3 interwoven stories plus weaving individually the backstories of each of the 4 or 5 player characters into 1 or more of these stories. Well, that is going to take a lot of effort, and way more effort than just doing a location-based dungeon. So, what Questing Beast argues is there are fewer rules to know, so being a rules encyclopedia isn't as big of a deal when there aren't as many rules, and you don't have to make this big epic story. Not everybody's good at making a big epic story, but making a tight, 2-level dungeon around a theme like a ruin with some sort of a basement underneath that's got kind of undead or something in it. Lots of DMs can do that. It's not that hard. And you can use random number tables to generate the monsters and the treasure and everything, so you don't even have to pull it out of your own imagination. You just tweak it a little bit. You don't have character arcs in like a West Marches or an old school game. You just have a world, and you referee the world, and if possible, you could be generating the world by random numbers, right? So the story is emerging out of what's happening, not out of the backstories and the original storyline you made for your world. And so it's not an epic story beforehand, but it might be epic afterwards. And if you're talking about scheduling and stuff, if it's West Marches, they do their own scheduling, right? The old school way was either the DM is just there every week, and people who want to show up, or in West Marches, the players decide when they're going to, when and where they're going to meet, and they're responsible for arranging that. And then the GM just, obviously gives you the days he can make it, but then the GM just shows up when it's, time to run the game, right? And so the players are responsible for the scheduling. There's no life coaching. There's no epic storytelling, and the rules reference part is reduced. And so he said maybe the reason that way more than half of the people who play the OSR also DM, and way fewer than half of people in 5th edition do, is that it's a lot easier to run the OSR way. And there's a reason why old school DMs ran and have continued to run games for years or decades, and modern games end after an average of 6 sessions, right? Because the effort that it takes to maintain what the article is describing is so high that not many people can do it. And you're basically pricing potential GMs with the ability to run games each week in terms of, the the basics of running a game. You're pricing them out by saying, oh, you can't do it the basic way. You have to do it this, 3 epic storyline way with weaving in the backstories of all the player characters, right? That's the part that a lot of GMs probably can't do. And you're just, like I say, pricing them out of GMing and therefore making it so GMs are a lot rarer and harder to come across. And now there's a shortage of them in New York City and probably other places. So I agree with him, but I also think that part of the equation is that, especially in recent times, Wizards of the Coast has focused far more on players than on dungeon masters. And I think that the reason they do that, I know that the reason they do that, is because there are way more players, right? They said something in a meeting recently, in like a stockholder meeting, that like it's 80 to 20 players to DMs, but we know it's probably more like 30 to 1. There are way, way more players than there are DMs. It's just that DMs buy a lot of material. Like they'll buy every adventure just because they might play it someday, even though they're only going to run 1 or 2 of them. So this makes it look like it's 20% DMs, but it's really more like 2%, right, or 3%. And so 90-some% of the population is players, and only a handful of percent is the GM. So the company has to target players. So what's happening, in my opinion, is that the rules of in the newer versions of the books, the rules are basically letting players run rampant in the DM's world with almost no checks and balances and insanely powerful character options. And this is wrecking the experience for GMs, right? And it's going to cause any competent GM who cares about their world to throw up their hands and want to quit. And we're actually seeing this happen. Luke Hart from the DM Lair, who makes his money off of 5th edition, has decided with his players, they've all decided together, but it was his idea, to shift his own home game from 5th edition D&D to Pathfinder. This is a guy who makes his career, his money, he quit his day job to run his DM Lair company with his employees. That's how committed he is to 5th edition, and yet he's bailing on it for his home game. He's had it. He can't take the power creep and the fact that every time Wizards of the Coast puts out another supplement, it's basically pro player and anti-GM, right? And people don't understand what this means. The more power and the more options you give players, the harder you make the GM's job, because he's got to adjudicate all these options. He's got to account for all these options, and you make the game easier, which makes it harder for the GM to challenge the players. And at some point, any GM who wants to challenge players is just going to be like, I can't do it. And so you have Luke Hart. He's gone. Matt Colville, again, another guy. He's got a whole company centered around the game of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Whole company. And yet, the most recent actual play that he put out was 4th edition, not 5th. Right? Even he is starting to struggle with 5th edition. The basic expert, he started out in 5th edition, switched to OSR because he couldn't run it anymore. It was too hard. He had another guy in his channel, and I can't remember his name, recently for an interview, and the guy, same thing. He started out in 3rd, I think, moved to 5th, ran 5th for a while and was like, I can't do it anymore, switched. Now he plays 3rd and OSR, but he can't do 5th because it's just, they're letting the player characters, they're letting the players just run roughshod. There's just rampant in the DM's world, and there's nothing the DM can do to stop them. Rules is written. You'd have to do massive homebrewing, banning of abilities, feats, spells, races, and classes in order for this not to happen. And so GMs are getting fed up. And by the way, yours truly, right? 2.5, 3 years ago, 3 years ago this month, I was reading the DM's Guide for the first time in years, the 5th edition DM's Guide, and starting to think about world building. A friend of mine at work had invited me into a D&D game that ultimately he was not able to run, and I then took over for him. But even before I knew I was going to take over, I was starting to do some world building and thinking I wanted to play a little bit, but then I would like to GM. I was excited 5th edition looked like a good game to me on a first read. Badly written rules in some places, but I understood the basics because I was an old school player, and I was able to sort of figure it out. And I liked sort of the advantage and disadvantage mechanics and some of the other things that I saw. And I thought, okay, this is looking like a pretty good game, and I feel like I could run in it. Right? Fast forward 2.5 years later, I will never run 5th edition again. I'm done. Why? Because all these supplements they're putting out, I had to fight tooth and nail to keep that stuff out of my game, which with one of my players really wanting it, and it would have let them completely just bull in a china shop through my whole campaign, right? Bull in a china shop. And it's not that I don't want the players to win the scenarios, right? I built the campaign for them to defeat the big bad evil guy and save the Roman Empire. That was my expectation of what would happen, but I didn't want it to be easy. I didn't want them to be able to just smash every puzzle, every riddle, every trap, every monster without any effort because of the bizarre and ridiculous abilities that all these new races and classes get. I wanted them to be able to I wanted to challenge them. And doing that was increasingly difficult as they leveled up and increasingly difficult as new supplements came out. And so I'm out. Right? So I'm no noob to this. Neither is Colville. Neither is Luke Hart. Neither is Basic Expert. Neither is the other guy that was on his channel. I have another friend who got so fed up he started running, and he's been playing 5th edition for years, but he got so fed up with all this power creep and everything, he started running AD&D, and he's loving it because there's no power creep in there. Right? It's a much more brutal game. And so a lot of the stuff that's driving him nuts about 5th edition just you can't do in 1st edition D&D. Right? And so these are experienced GMs. Me, Luke Hart, Matt Colville, this other friend of mine, Basic Expert, and whoever he was interviewing. These are people who have been playing a long time. And they just can't take it anymore. And they said, I'm done with 5th edition. I can't DM this game. And a couple of them were saying they play in 5th edition games, but they won't run them. Right? Like they said, well, 5th edition is okay to play, but I'm not going to run it. It's just too hard. Right? And these are experienced GMs who are saying, I'm fed up with this. So I think that's part of the GMing problem, too. It's not just that people who haven't GM'd look at what it's saying you have to do and go, I can't do that. That's part of it. But I think it's also that people who have GM'd DM'd D&D, right? 5th edition, like, I don't see, I don't know how Mercer does it, right? 8 years, 10 years, however long he's been doing it. Because I can't take it anymore. And Luke Hart can't take it anymore. And Matt Colville doesn't seem to be like he can take it anymore. Like, I'll put out content. Luke Hart's like, I'll put out content, but I'm not DMing. I'm GMing Pathfinder. You know, I mean, that's really insane for somebody who's made their entire living on 5th edition. And that should be sending alarm bells up if the people at Wizards of the Coast are at all paying attention. I doubt they are. But, man, if I were in charge of that company, my alarm bells would be going off. Because these people who are like the most dedicated folks to this edition are quitting and running a different game, saying this is too hard. You're making it too DM unfriendly. And I think that this is what's happening. And I don't know what the end game is here, but I strongly suspect that the end game might be that they're going to try to make one D&D, and I've mentioned this before, fully automated, so you don't need a DM, and you're going to end up with a bunch of players running around a computer-generated thing like this, playing D&D like it's City of Heroes, not needing a DM. I mean, we don't need a DM here. It's all computer programmed. It can be done, right? But it won't be D&D anymore because D&D is played with dungeon masters and other people. Right? It's not played with players and no DM. I mean, I don't know what game it would be at that point, but it wouldn't be Dungeons and Dragons anymore. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to this. And I think that if the automation that I think is coming does come, this will make the problem worse. Right? Because now nobody in the group is going to have to DM. They can just say, "Oh, let's just do the automated." And so the question becomes: is DMing going to become a lost art? Right? That only a few really old grognards remember how to do. Because if you and all your friends think A, DMing is too hard because of all this stuff, that it said in the article, and B, DMing is too hard because of all the power creep and everything, and the fact that the players are, kind of running roughshod over the campaign, and you can't really run roughshod over the computer campaign, right? Because you can only do what the computer is programmed to let you do, and it'll be ready to anticipate. Yeah, we turn D&D into City of Heroes, basically, where you're playing with a group, and then who's going to learn how to DM? Why would you learn? How are you going to practice it? Right? And it's sort of like somebody watching one of my, I might have been way back when I was doing Liberty Last, and it wasn't doing less rants. I was just, talking about games and stuff, and we were talking about grouping in City of Heroes and pulling and stuff like this. And there was somebody who said, the group pull and everything. This is becoming a lost art, or has become a lost art in City of Heroes, because everybody just solos plus fours now, and you don't need to do it anymore, right? And so nobody knows how to do it. So then when you get into a really hard task force or something where maybe you do need to do it, there's nobody who knows how, because it's just not done anymore, and so it becomes a lost art. And I wonder if that's going to happen to DMing. I mean, maybe not GMing other games, right? Because other games will still need GMs, but DMing D&D, I don't know. I wonder. I just I don't know, and I think this is actually a potentially very serious issue for anybody who likes D&D as a game that you play with a DM at the table or in a Zoom, because that might be going away. I mean, I feel like the fact that you've got all this paid DMing going on also should be kind of setting up alarm bells, because like the idea of paying someone to run a D&D game should be outlandish, and yet it's happening all the time, right? Which means people are not able to find games where they're not able to get into a game their friend is running, right? They have to pay someone because nobody they know is willing to DM, right? So that tells you there's a shortage. And then you have people willing to do it for pay. I'll do all this work for pay, right? But there aren't that many of them, and certainly not enough to supply the entire thing, right? The entire population. And so I don't know what happens from here. I guess it's all going to depend on whether Wizards of the Coast is successful at finding a way to automate the DMing process on 1D&D such that it can work like this, right? Or the way BioWare, like the SLS mission from Star Wars: The Old Republic, if you've ever played that game, the very first Flashpoint was a lot like a D&D game, right? Where you're making skill checks and persuasion checks and combat and role playing with each other, and doing it in a group, and you're randomly rolling to see whose conversation option gets picked and everything. It's an awful lot like a D&D game. I remember even saying to my friends when the first, like, second day, whatever, of Star Wars: The Old Republic with my roleplay guild, four of us, when two of the guild leaders, me and one of the other guild leaders, and two other people who were part of the guild, the roleplay guild, went on the SLS, and man, we had a ball. And I remember even saying into the chat, I feel like I'm playing D&D with my friends around the table again. That's what it made me feel like. And it kind of did feel that way, even though there wasn't a DM. There was just a computer that was running in the background all of the DMing features. It felt like it to me as a player, right? But it wasn't exactly the same. And if they can make that experience available to players, then where's the incentive for running D&D as a dungeon master? Nobody's going to want to do it. Nobody's going to need to do it. And especially when it seems like it's so hard, and when there's so many DM unfriendly rules coming out year after year, who needs this crap? Let's just let the computer do it, right? So I think that, I don't know, I think that we're clearly entering some sort of a transition period with role-playing games, and particularly with Dungeons and Dragons, since that's the 800-pound gorilla. But you got to remember, as D&D goes, so the other games go. And if it turns out that D&D becomes an MMO essentially. And I know there's a D&D online. I'm not talking about that, but where like a co-op game, kind of like Neverwinter Nights, where you log in and set up like and pick to choose the automated GM and then just choose your conversation options and get into combats and click on things and so on. I think that if that starts to happen to D&D, it might start to happen to some of the other games too. People like if that's going to make them money, then all the companies that want to make money will do the same thing to make money, right? And so let's go to Loomis. Where is she? I probably came too far. Yeah, I did. She's all the way down there now. Great. That was stupid. Can I teleport to her? Sometimes you can. No. Yeah, that was really dumb, guys. Sorry about that. You had to watch me fly. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there will be some games, OSR games, and maybe some companies, maybe like Pinnacle and a few others, that are like, no, we're doing the tabletop role-playing game experience, and that's what we're about. But I think if D&D, if Hasbro can make a lot of money from D&D doing this, automated thing that I think they're going to ultimately end up having to do, right? It may not even be 100% their plan yet, but I think they're going to have to do it because if they create this big giant computerized virtual tabletop with all these 3D assets that you can do microtransactions so they can monetize their game, and people are logging in, taking accounts, and being like, I'm going to quit because I can't find a game, I can't find a DM. There's nobody in the matchmaking service. It's all players and no DMs. They're going to have to step in, Wizards of the Coast, and do something so that the people who are logged in the lobbies waiting for DMs can go play their game, right? Even MMOs, they have to have matchmaking services and stuff because people don't want to spend 15 or 20 minutes when they could be playing just trying to look for a damn group, right? And or now in D&D, a group looking for a damn DM. Who can DM? Can somebody DM this part of Princess of the Apocalypse for us? We need a DM. No, that's not going to work. They're going to have to automate it. I'm sure of it. It's the only way they can guarantee their quote-unquote monetization that they're looking for. And so if that's true, and then they start making piles of money doing that, it will be very attractive to other companies to do the same thing. The question is whether other companies would have the resources to do it, right? And I got to keep my fingers crossed that the games I'm interested in don't go that route, because that's not the route that I want. I'm not interested in. I mean, Neverwinter Nights is a perfectly fun game, but that's not the experience I want for my tabletop role playing, right? My tabletop role playing needs to have a game master. And I'm perfectly happy to do it. I'm willing to do it. I'm not going to do what they described. I'm going to do location-based, points of interest, open world, sandbox, West Marches type stuff. But I'll run, and my players will have a human GM. Platonic solids. What is this thing? I don't know if I have to care about that. Let's just mission teleport. Enough flying around Independence Port, guys. So yeah, I don't know. Leave your comments. What do you think about this? Do you agree with the newspaper article's definition of DMing, that it's taxing, that it's thankless, and what was the other thing they said? Taxing, thankless, and overwhelming. I don't agree with at least two of those three. I think that 5th edition, especially high-level 5th edition games, are overwhelming as a GM. And I don't even say, the one guy said on the Basic Experts stream, he said it's not even hard, it's frustrating. And I agree. It's not like you can't do it. It's not like it's hard, but it's not fun. And if you look at like Alex Macris's book, no, sorry, it's not Alex Macris. I'm sorry, I'm misquoting. Worlds Without Number. Kevin Crawford, the guy's a genius. And at one point, he's talking about in like prepping stuff for future game sessions and what you need to prep, right? In the like the GMing section. And he says you should be prepping for one of two reasons. When you're doing stuff for like world building and prepping stuff, you should be doing for one of two reasons only. either you should be working on something because you're going to need it in the next session immediately, right? Not 5 sessions down the road, but it's Thursday and you got a session coming Saturday and you're working on a map because you know you're going to need it. Or working on something that you don't need, but you want to work on because it's fun, right? So you should either be working on what you immediately need or working on what's fun. There's no other reason to work on something as a GM, right? So if that's true, it's not taxing. Because either you just need it right now, which case you just do it, or for the most part, what you're doing is you're working on something cool that you like. I like drawing maps, so I'm going to make a map. My solo game, which I'm not publishing to this channel, I'm about 8 sessions in. And like it's all by myself. I'm not publishing it. Nobody's going to see it, but I still like nice maps. So the character's a paladin, and she works for this church, a cathedral. And so I went online and I looked for a bunch of maps, and I found a really cool map of a temple with grounds and stuff. And then I was telling this friend of mine, I went into Photoshop because the temple had carpeting and altar decorations like painted on. It was a really nice artwork, but it was red. And the deity that my paladin worships, his color is green. So I went into Photoshop and did a color swap. And it took me like, I don't know, 20 minutes to do it right, make it look good, right? And then I imported it into Foundry. I didn't have to do any of that. I could do the whole thing theater of the mind. I'm a soloist. I don't need a map. But I like doing it. So I did it for fun. Right? Lots of that kind of stuff for GMs, right? There's lots of that kind of enjoyable prep work. Prep is play, as Sean Tompkins says in Ironsworn, right? And it can be very fun play. And so I'm fine with doing it. I enjoy that kind of stuff. Right? So I personally don't agree that it's taxing. I personally don't agree that it's overwhelming, but I do think it can be frustrating. And I don't agree that it's thankless. I think my players appreciated my game. I don't know that they specifically and explicitly said, thank you for running the game at any point, like exactly like that. But they thanked me indirectly in a lot of ways, saying they had fun. One way that you thank your GM is by showing up for the next session. That's how he knows she knows you're enjoying their game, right? So, and they always did. So, I didn't feel like it was thankless. I feel like they mostly appreciated what I did, and I know for a fact that two of the other people who are often GMs, the guy who's running our temporary critical role right now, and the girl in Finland, both of them had said at multiple points in my campaign, like, I can't believe how much work you've done on this, right? So they know how much work this is, and they appreciate it. So I don't feel like it was thankless. I don't feel like it was taxing, and I don't feel like it was overwhelming. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you find, those of you who are game masters, do you find it taxing? Do you find it overwhelming? Do you find it thankless? And for those of you who've GM'd multiple games, are there some games that are easier or harder to run than others? And I know there were times when I was at my most frustrated in 5th edition, when I was like, why didn't I say I was going to run champions? I can run champions without looking at the book. To this day, I'm just that familiar with it, and it just works as a game for me. Now, the reason I didn't do champions, I mentioned this on like a long time ago in one of my Let's Plays. The reason I didn't propose champions is I just didn't have any superhero world ideas or like storyline ideas or whatever. I just feel like it's easier for me to create fantasy games, like the storylines or the not plots, whatever, the adventures are easier in fantasy for me than they are in champions. Didn't used to be that way, but it is now. I just wasn't getting cool ideas for a superhero game. But in the moment of running it for an evening, if I've got the scenario, right, it's the ideas for scenarios that I wasn't really getting. But if I've got the scenario idea, I could run D&D at the table all day, no problem. And way more easily than 5th edition. Champions, so much easier for me. So, it can depend on the rules, right? I find Champions easier to run than D&D. I don't know about Savage Worlds. I just don't find D&D 5th edition all that easy to run. And so, I find it very frustrating to run, and Champions not at all. And so, yeah, leave your comments. Are there some games? Is there maybe one game that you find pretty comfortable to run, and then other games that are less so? Or is all games that are taxing and overwhelming? When you're running your game, do you view yourself as a combination rules encyclopedia, storyteller, Tolkien-like storyteller, right? Lord of the Rings, slash party planner, slash life coach? Or do you see yourself more like the OSR game where I'm just putting some stuff out there and the players will encounter it when they do? And I'm going to roll on some random tables for inspiration, and, we're good to go. Which way do you feel is more sustainable for you? I mean, there may be some people, in fact, there are probably a lot of people who could run it with, the random number generators, but just don't find that to be enjoyable and want to, write the story themselves without all this random stuff, because the random stuff can lead to a lot of, incongruities or something like that. So feel free to leave your comments. I always enjoy hearing from folks, and let me know, where do you fall on this? Do you think if there is a shortage of GMs like they're saying, and I'm sure there is, and if there aren't enough to go around, why do you think that is? Do you agree with the Questing Beast that the description, that the standard to which GMs are being held is the problem, and that people feel they can't live up to that standard of storyteller slash party planner, et cetera, et cetera? Or do you think maybe more like what I'm saying is that it's not so much that, it's that the people who have DM'd are getting frustrated because of all of the player-centric changes that are being made without regard to how much it makes the GM's job more difficult, and GMs are starting to get fed up. So let me know in the comments what you think, and I'm not going to make you watch me hoof it all the way back to Amanda Lupus, because that's going to take a long time. So I think we're going to stop here, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Let's Rant. And again, please feel free to leave your comments and let me know what you think. And until next time, I am Scrapper Lock, and this has been City of Heroes. Let's Rant with Scrapper on the Rebirth server.